This podcast is brought to you by lineupmedia.fm.
Because if you can tell me what your habits are, I can tell you what sort of a person you are. I can tell you what your future looks like.
But like I always say, life is 10% what happens to you, it's 90% what you do about it.
The people who are most effective in the workplace believe that their future is going to be bigger than their past. When people don't believe that their future is going to be bigger than their past, they begin to disengage.
You're listening to The Circuit of Success, a podcast dedicated to helping you achieve success in every facet of life. Only on the lineupmedia.fm podcast network. Now, your host, Brett Gilliland.
Welcome to The Circuit of Success. I'm your host, Brett Gilliland. Today, I've got Marty Strong with me. Marty, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks, Brett.
Good. Well, it's awesome to have you, man. I enjoy talking to authors, business leaders, people that were Navy SEALs. And guess what? You happen to be all three of those things. So that's kind of a big deal, huh?
It's a hat trick.
That's a hat trick. So he is a former SEAL. He is a CEO and a chief strategy officer of a company. He's an author of 10 total books. But your newest one, Be Nimble, comes out into this year. Correct. And then Be Visionary, which right over here, I guess, over my shoulder, Be Visionary, Visionary Wealth Advisors. We like that word. We'll talk about that as well coming out next year, right? So
that's correct.
So excited to have you, man. It's been looking forward to this. But like on every show, Marty, we like to start out with just kind of what's made you the man you are today. You don't just wake up and write 10 books and become a CEO and become a SEAL and do all things. So that there was some stuff that was defining moments probably in your life. And so why don't you maybe give us as far back as you want to go? And I know it's an open-ended question, but kind of what's made you the man you are today?
Yeah, it's kind of a strange mix because most people that know me would say that I'm a planner. I'm a strategist. I'm always thinking out multiple paths. And then when I try to answer the question that you just posed, it's all nonlinear. It wasn't planned. It's all flying by the seat of my pants, or, get on one train instead of the other train and went, a totally different direction in my life. So I'll start off. I joined the Navy when I was 17 with the intention of becoming a radar and air traffic control expert, like my father had been in the Korean War in the Navy. And through a mix-up of orders, I ended up in Coronado, California, where basic SEAL training is. And I explained what I thought I was supposed to be doing. I was supposed to be showing up at a ship after going through 17 weeks of training. And one of the senior enlisted SEALs there at the training center in Coronado talked me into staying. And, he said, and I was like 125 pounds, I didn't look like some kind of a Marvel hero
on TV. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I said, all right, it wasn't an easy conversation, but eventually he talked me into the idea. And then if for some reason I quit because it's a voluntary program, I could just go back to what I was trained to do by the Navy, which is to do radar and air traffic control. So I was a competitive swimmer in high school. I played football, I wrestled, I played basketball, and I lived in Hawaii for 2 years. And so I surfed and I wasn't afraid of big waves and things. So all those things kind of came together. Being from a divorced family probably had a lot to do with my psychological resilience. Yeah. Although I don't think I understood that at the time. So I started with a class of 126 guys. And 6 months later, we had 13 of us left from the original 126. Yeah. And I was off to the races in the SEAL teams for the next 20 years. Yeah,
that's got to be very humbling, isn't it? Would you say 126 down to 13?
And that's after the Navy traditionally probably screens through a couple of thousand to get to that starting class number of 126 that meet all the criteria to start.
So you're not one of the guys that just said, hey, I want to be a Navy SEAL from the beginning. It just kind of happened to what you were saying.
That's right. And back when I went in, SEALs were a lot more secretive. We didn't have an actual Navy recruiting program for SEALs. Okay. It was kind of word of mouth. They weren't a big organization. There was only a SEAL Team 1 on the West Coast and SEAL Team 2 on the East Coast. There were some other special ops teams in the Navy, which were called underwater demolition teams. They had a different mission, although everybody that was at those teams went through the basic SEAL course in Coronado. they were all kind of put together in 1983, 84, and they were all redesignated SEAL teams at that point. But, you're talking about 250 SEALs maybe when I went in, and another 300 UDT frogmen. And then nowadays it's probably around 2,800 to 3,000 active duty SEALs.
Okay. So yeah, a lot different now. So let's kind of compare and contrast, if you will, what you've learned in SEAL training, BUDS training, and then what you've learned in the boardroom, if you will. So the professional world, right? I would assume there's a lot of similarities there that can go both ways. Is that a fair statement?
I think there's a lot more similarities in being a part of small or medium companies that are involved in scaling up or scaling down. I mean, scaling in both directions it can be traumatic. Mostly the functional requirements, the challenges of trying to become something different, to morph, to pivot, to evolve into a different kind of company, a different kind of organization, a team, a division, a department, whatever is being changed. It causes the stress. It causes the kind of the crisis atmosphere. And a lot of that is what they screen for in this initial SEAL screening and selection. And then they just reemphasize that and train you to prepare for it and handle it. You're already kind of psychologically predisposed to handling it better than the average person, but then they hone that and make that better. So you become a very calm person in a storm. And that's whether you're a technical expert as an enlisted SEAL, which I was for 10 years, or an officer leading things, which I was for the second 10 years. And that really helped in business, because I found that, obviously if the Navy's going to pay a couple of $1 million per SEAL to get them to that kind of mindset and that capability, that's not what you find in the mix of an average company.
No.
So it was helpful for me, and I didn't even realize how helpful it was going to be to other people. And I think other people in the military in general find this once they step into a business or a non-military organization, and especially from elite units. So it could be a fighter pilot, a Green Beret, or a SEAL. You tend to be the strong pole in the tent during the storm. I mean, people see you calmly reacting to the chaos. They see you addressing the crisis with, no fear and let's figure out a way to fix this. Let's figure out a way to deal with this. And that's a direct translation from a prior life with a lot of risk, sliding out of ropes in the middle of the night, being shot at, doing, freezing, doing all the things you do as a military veteran. And that, it helps better if you've been in the business for a while and you actually understand the business.
Yep.
But even if you don't completely, you can actually add a lot to morale and a lot to the feeling of optimism instead of pessimism than the average person in a business organization would normally expect.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you do that though? Right. I mean, it's easy to say that now because you did it, but how did you get yourself mentally to that point to where in the chaos? So again, whether that's with the SEALs or whether that's at work, how do you, especially as a leader, a CEO, whatever your title is, how do we stay calm in those times when there is crap flying around everywhere?
A lot of it's about managing your expectations, which goes back to your psychology. So, when I managed money with UBS, I had high net worth clients, and most of them were self-made people. I'd say 2/3 of them were high school graduates that were multimillionaires.
Yep.
All of them had stories of failing in business, not always to bankruptcy, but some of them had been bankrupt several times before they really took off. So if you go through that kind of crucible of experience as a small business owner, and you survive and continue down that path, there's a point where one person's crisis is another person's, problem or challenge, or even an opportunity. So you build resilience through practicing crisis experiences. That's what they do in the elite forces. They put you through training that are as close as possible, trying to recreate combat environments. The austerity, the fear, the lack of control of what's going to happen to you. So you stop having expectations of always positive outcomes. The helicopter's not coming to pick you up. Okay. Right. There's not going to be 10 guys there on the target. There's going to be 100 guys on the target. The maps they gave you aren't right. They're actually wrong. And so when you start from that premise, you don't get all worked up and emotional when things aren't working out the way. You just solve the problem set based on the facts in front of you.
Yep.
And anybody can do that in business. That's not a SEAL thing, but you could train leaders either by creating exercises, case studies, or you take advantage of the moment when the crisis hits and you turn it into a training event and you explain to everybody, this is what we're going to learn from this.
Yeah.
Don't just be reacting and being affected by it. We're going to fix this, but we're going to learn from this as a team. We're all going to get stronger. And the third or fourth time down the road this happens to us, piece of cake.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also that the step behind the step behind the step that's also behind the corner over there, right? I mean, I think that in my leadership deal since 2006, basically, so a long time, 15 years, you got to have a plan B, a plan C, a plan D. Would you agree with that? Because I think the people I've talked to in the military, it's not just plan A and we think it's going to work. You've got to have I don't know how many different plans, but a lot of them. Agree?
Yeah, I think so. One of the mindsets that you're taught is it's contingency thinking. If you have time, then you can do contingency planning. You can have a plan A, B, C, and D. And that's always good because just like any other, analytical process, you work out all these different paths. You look at a critical path. You look at a lack of resources, a lack of information. What's the impact on the probability that particular path is going to be successful? But then back to what I was saying before, they also teach you how to be a contingent thinker, because once you leave a safe place and you're out there in the middle of the desert, the mountains, the jungle, the swamp, whatever it is, the ocean, and things don't become or evolve the way you thought they were, you have to now start being able to think contingently in the next 5 steps ahead for the next 5 minutes, the next 15 minutes, so it's less about the big planning component of it and more about just having a mindset, absorb the real information. What's the facts now on the ground? Discard everything else because it's baggage. It doesn't matter anymore. So if you have the time, lay out contingency planning. I talk about that a lot more in the second book, Be Visionary, as a way to be comfortable with pivoting when a probability, maybe a low probability event actually happens because you've thought through it with your team already to some extent. And you're you're a wealth guy. So you can do this with financial, clients because you don't control the markets.
Right.
If you're on a train, you have some limited, alterations to the expectations, right? But
that's right.
But you don't control the markets. You don't control the economies. You don't control the different industries that the market represents or the different markets represent. And, you just have to get into a mindset that I want to understand the main drivers of the analysis. I want to try to have as many contingency plans as possible and have the plans offset risk as much as possible. But I also have to be a contingent thinker and be able to think 3 to 5 steps ahead in the moment. Yeah. What's around that corner and then what's down that alley kind of a thing.
Yeah. That's that visionary thing, right? That's what we talk about, is what the future could or will be like, is how you really define from what a visionary is, right? And that's what we're helping our clients with. But when you think about that, when you say that contingency plans, plan B, all that kind of stuff, but what is the mindset when it's going bad though, and you're in the thick of things? How do you stay positive or stay neutral, however you want to word it? How do you do that? So then, oh my gosh, this is happening. And then you start to freak out.
So I'm actually living that right now. So we have, the kind of the proverbial black swan event, and there's a couple good books out there, but most of the analysis of black swans in companies, businesses, it shows that it's something that you might have known, you just ignored the information. It didn't match your expectations, or you ignored it because it wasn't part of your data set or whatever. And that's fine. So, but it's a black swan. It is what it is. The real test and the real breakout or shakeout is, what does the leadership do when they realize there's a black swan? And it kind of falls into 3 different categories in general. You go into denial and you just say, well, I don't agree that it's a black swan. We're going to keep doing what we're doing and we'll get ourselves out of this just by, knuckling down. The second is you have that kind of denial for a short period of time, and then you capitulate and realize the facts as you know them in your environment, your industry, whatever it is that you're operating in, are no longer the facts that you've been using. And you have to throw out everything and start from scratch and create a new battle plan to go forward. And then the third category is they don't go into denial. Within hours, the leadership team says, this isn't the world we were in 24 hours ago. It's a new world. Let's reconstruct what we have to do, reconstruct the company, our plans, our goals, what's achievable in the new normal and the new paradigm. And that's actually, those are the groups that tend to succeed. And that first group that goes into denial, they tend to miss this entire move. And a lot of times they end up losing value, and kind of like Kodak with the digital photography thing. And they get picked up for pennies on the dollar by other companies because they just never, ever, ever accepted what had changed. Yep. So what I'm going
you
through,
think about your point about that Kodak, you think about Blockbuster.
There's,
MySpace,
VHS and Betamax,
Yeah.
Betamax came out with the greatest product in the world. VHS, the guys that did that looked at it and said, we can't match that quality for a lower price point, but how much quality do people really need? And so they surveyed people and they said, well, we want to be able to videotape movies. Well, Betamax was set up for videotaping weddings.
Yeah.
Right. With a camcorder. So the VHS, geniuses, visionaries said, we'll come up with a little bit more of a rude visual experience, extend it so that you can tape it a feature-length movie, and we'll make a machine that plays it and takes it right off your TV. And Betamax just disappeared. VHS came out, cheaper product, more applicable, and boom, that was the end of that. So and I bet you for a while, Betamax said, yeah, that we have better quality.
That'll never work. Right.
Because look at our quality, because they were focused on that one element. So right now, and companies all over the United States are dealing with this. The administration came out with a COVID vaccine mandate. So I am a CEO of two different kinds of companies. I have a healthcare company and I have a government contracting company.
Yeah.
And two of the industries that were pointed to in the executive order were those two industries. So if you work for the federal government, 100% of your employees must be vaccinated or they can't work, period. And the deadline's December 8th. So I got 400 or 500 people in that boat.
Wow.
And on the healthcare side, if you are a medical provider, you will not be allowed in a medical care environment unless you're vaccinated. And I've got about 150 in that world. So I've got, say, close to 650 people in two companies that, as of a speech a week ago or a week and a half ago, are suddenly not sure they're going to have a job unless they get proof of vaccination. Yeah. We didn't anticipate that.
In 10 weeks. Right.
Yeah. And on the healthcare side, there's not even a timetable. Every hospital and every care environment can decide tomorrow if you don't show it at the door, you don't get in. And there's a lot of things in the news right now about hospital systems and healthcare groups are already kicking out like 175 one day, 200. There's a story this morning about over 1,000 in New York City in combined hospitals. So the Friday morning after the speech, our world changed. We suddenly went from just operating and executing our normal functions, the strategy, et cetera, to suddenly we had this huge problem and very little time to solve it. It wasn't something anybody would have anticipated.
Right.
So that's a long setup to answer your question. So I'll answer your question briefly. Having understood how black swan events are dealt with a high probability of success after the fact, meaning the group that immediately realizes the world's changed and just attack the new set of facts. That's what we did Friday morning. And that's what we've done every day since then. So we're attacking it like it's a new requirement. We're not sitting in a room going, why us? Or, hey, right. I hope they come up with some kind of a waiver program that's going to make it go away. It is what it is. Let's go figure out how we're going to attack this thing. And I put a couple of people as like czars in charge of certain segments of it, census collection, et cetera. And we're off to the races. And that's what I would say to anybody. That's what you got to do. Face up to it, sit in a room, get in front of a whiteboard, reinvent, and then go.
Well, you're going straight to the action part, right? And the circuits of success, the name of this podcast, are attitude, your belief system, your actions that ultimately get you the results. Right now, I always tell people, it doesn't matter what your attitude. I mean, it matters, right? When we're talking about the circuits, but if you don't take action in this event, your black swan event here, we can go into denial. Like you said, we can go into a room and cry and pour me and pour this and why that. Or number 3 is what you're doing is don't go to denial, reconstruct, attack the facts, come up with a game plan. That's action.
Then execute.
And execute it, right? And have the discipline to execute it. And I think that's the thing right now is I always talk about so much about discipline is the things that we do as visionary wealth advisors, but even me personally over my career, it's not rocket science. It's just having the discipline to show up every day and do it day after day after day, even on the days you don't want to do it. That's what makes people successful, right?
Yes, because I'm a strong believer in learning from anything. And being able to talk a lot about, especially in the beginning, there's a self-inventory for leaders, and then you've done the inventory, kind of a SWOT analysis on yourself, and then you correct the issues you need to correct, and you continue doing the things that are strong, strong attributes. So even on a bad day, even on a day where I don't want to go in, I try to turn it into, what can I learn from my mindset? Why do I have this mindset? What can I do to improve it? And if it's about something that's going to happen that day, I try to flip it so that it's essentially a positive. Mike Tyson, his famous line about everybody's got a plan until they're punched in the face, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, what do you learn when you're training as a boxer from being punched in the face? I mean, it doesn't seem like that would be a good way to teach somebody. It is. You learn how to duck and dodge, and you learn why it's important to have fast feet. There's a lot of things you learn from being punched in the nose, and sometimes that's what you're really running into in life or in business. Getting punched in the nose is an opportunity to figure something out and be stronger the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great feedback. And so what would you say for you, the CEO of multiple companies, you talk about hundreds of employees on both sides. What are you finding are the culture growers for your companies and the culture killers? Anything stand out there for you?
Well, in this vein, a culture killer, if you allowed it to persist, would be people that are psychologically challenged by change and the sudden kind of dark cloud of risk that something like a black swan would cause, right? If you let them run around the building for a while,
yep,
they will start to infect everybody. And it's going to be harder for the leadership team to get everybody, to execute and believe in it and say, look, we're not concerned. We got a plan. Here's the plan. Let's go for it. We'll tweak it along the way. So if you can nip that in the bud in a crisis situation right up front, and you react and you put a plan in place, that's the first step. The second step is you got to go around and realize people are people, and your leaders have to do that, because that's an incident driven or an event driven kind of downer party going on, right? Just regular business. Well, first off, selection, right? So if anybody in a SEAL team, if they're sitting in a boat, if anybody was complaining about how cold it is, everybody would just lay into them and give them a hard time, right? But they've all been selected for these attributes and these traits, so they're not going to, if they complain, it's just they know they're going to get, creamed with a bunch of criticism from everybody, right, and a lot of jokes and stuff. And then they're going to have to hear about it for the next 2 years whenever anybody gets drunk. Hey, remember that time Joe was crying in the boat about how cold it was?
Yeah.
So there's a price to be paid. But in a normal business, normal organization, you don't have that kind of luxury unless you design it that way and stay strict in that design. So one way is your selection process. If you're going to be in a dynamic organization, whether it's a very creative organization or an organization that's designed to grow, and so it's going to constantly be scaling and kind of reinventing itself, you have to screen and hire for people that are okay with that. If you're going to do a lot of project work, you have to, hire and screen for people that are okay shifting from one focus to another focus, working with one group to another group, because people are comfortable where people are comfortable. There are people that do a fantastic job focused in a cubicle on a very limited set of issues and a very tight lane and authorities, and they will perform brilliantly for you. You take a bunch of people like that and stick them in a room and say, I want you to create something as a team, and they fall apart. That's not the way they're wired. So you can actually create a bad situation by either hiring the wrong kind of people for those dynamics or you can create a better situation and a higher probability of high morale and less of the low morale in general or in response to an event or crisis if you screen for those other attributes.
Yeah. So when you talk about success or think about success now, do you find it differently, define it differently today than maybe you did 10, 20 years ago?
For myself or for...
I mean, I'd say specifically for yourself. We're here talking with you, but I'd say for yourself, but also just in life in general. As we age, as we become more successful ourselves and we've seen things, right? Life experience. I think for me, I know I've changed my definition of success over time.
If I was going to put it in a bumper sticker, I'd say survival equals success. If you were a business owner and you survive, and that doesn't mean maybe the first business you start, doesn't last forever. It may be that you survive as a business person and you build a second business, or you build a third business, or you buy a franchise because you weren't very good at building businesses, and then you're good at, as long as you survive, you're winning. As long as you survive, you're successful. If you're learning, it's the same thing. I think learning is survival, and trying to be as open-minded and objective as you possibly can every day to all kinds of different inputs from all kinds of sources allows you to learn and become stronger, which adds to your survival, and the survival leads to success over the long term.
Yeah. So when you think about your comfort zone, I like to call these things your comfort zone callus, right? We have calluses on our hands from maybe working outside or playing golf, doing whatever people do. How do you bust through the comfort zone callus? Because I always tell people, like, if you're watching this, the circle's really small. You break through it the first time, it gets a little bit bigger and then a little bit bigger. And then all of a sudden now the things I may do 20 years into business would have scared the absolute daylights out of me 20 years ago. Right. So what have you done to maybe reposition yourself to bust through that comfort zone and do it on things that you've done around the world that, I've not even had a thought of it being able to do because I wasn't a Navy SEAL. But how did you do that? How did you bust out of the comfort zone callus?
Well, I don't seek that particular kind of challenge, that level of challenge, lightly. And so if it's not aligned with, say, what I'm doing as a business, I'd make a decision. I want to do it. So 6 years ago, I read the 4-Hour Work Week
by Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss, right? And in there, they had this living your bucket list. And so I'm reading this, and most of the guidance he was giving had to do with what I guess most people's bucket list is to travel and all that. And he said, well, travel now while you're healthy and you can do things. Well, I've been to 44 plus countries and a lot of them multiple times. So travel wasn't what I wanted to do. So I listed my bucket list and I thought, okay, I'll do this exercise. And I put down, I want to be able to play the guitar. I want to be able to speak Spanish fluently because I've tried to speak Spanish fluently 10 times in my life. And I want to get a black belt. And because I've had a couple of different kinds of brown belts. And I've always moved around the Navy. I always had to stop. And I want to write a fiction book and I want to write a nonfiction business book. So that was it. And all. So they weren't really like easy experiences I could price out, like he was saying, by going to Expedia.
Yeah.
So I looked at all of them. And the other component in that book was about how to inventory your time. Go 7 days. How much time are you spending on things that have no bearing on or any value to you, that are old habits? Well, my old habit was I was a news junkie. And because of my former life with, managing money for 8 years, I was watching CNBC in the morning. I was listening to CNBC on satellite radio on the way to work. I mean, all this stuff had nothing to do with my day job. It had nothing to do with anything else. It was just with every profession I had changed, I still cared about, geopolitical debates and, military strategy. And that was all wasted effort, really, wasted time. So when I added all that up, I had something like 2.5 hours a day, every day, times 7 days. And I wouldn't really miss it if I just converted it to something else. So you're supposed to convert it to something you want to do.
Yeah.
Not necessarily your bucket list. I decided to convert it to my bucket list. And so I picked the writing first. So I wrote the first time travel book because of that exercise.
So instead of watching CNBC, you said, instead of watching it, now I'm going to write.
Right.
Yep.
And I actually listened to Audible books about writing, about character development, all that on the way to work instead of listening to CNBC on the way to work. So everything was kind of towards that focus. I got a I got into a regimen where I woke up at 5, got coffee, started writing at about 5:15, and finished around 6:15. Then I worked out, and I was in at work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And once I got used to that, it didn't affect anybody. I mean, it was dark out when I was done with my writing and everything. It was dark out, so I was getting all that in, and I still had a little of that 2.5 hours left over if I wanted to use it. And that's how I ended up going down the path of writing the books. And then about a year later, I started going into lessons in Thai boxing, Muay Thai. And that was pretty interesting because I did martial arts for a long time when I was younger, but I wanted to get a black belt. Well, in Muay Thai, they don't really have a black belt. They have like an equivalency to black belt, and there's a test and everything. And it took me 3 years and 2 months before I got it. Wow. So the metaphor or the analogy about getting punched in the face. Yeah. So that here I was a CEO, did very well in business. I didn't feel like I was off my game in almost all categories of my life. And I was in there getting beat up because I was too slow, too old. And I didn't
too
really
old,
know.
too slow.
Yeah. So that was a challenge. Every day I'd go to lunch for like an hour and a half of training and then I'd come back and I'd be limping and somebody go, "You okay?" And I said, "Yeah." And I had a big smile on my face, It's like I learned a lot in an hour and a half. So that's, a couple of examples of how I decided to get outside of my comfort zone and do something that I wasn't doing. It wasn't for work. It wasn't, and I pushed through till I completed them.
I love it. Mentors have been a big part of your life. Have you had people you've kind of been there, done that for you, and you've reached out to?
Yes. Funny story. There's different kinds of reunions, et cetera, in the SEAL teams. And we have a SEAL museum down in Fort Pierce, Florida. And it's pretty big. It's got all kinds of great stuff there. It's got the actual lifeboat that Captain Phillips, that whole movie and everything where the SEALs shot the guys. And that's actually there. There's lots and lots of good stuff there. And there's a bar across this little bridge nearby that everybody goes to when they have this reunion. So I went over there with my wife and some other friends, and we're sitting in the corner. And I said, "Wow, that guy's sitting over there. That guy was my mentor when I was an enlisted SEAL. He's a Navy Cross winner. His nickname was the Eagle, and he was really great and everything." And she goes, "Really?" And so she goes over there and says, "Hey, do you remember Marty Strong?" And he's, "Oh yeah." He goes, "He's right over there." Because she knew I wouldn't just walk up to him because I hadn't seen him in 30 years.
Thanks a lot, honey.
And then the guy sitting next to him turns back to look over where I am. And it was a guy named Duke Leonard, who was my mentor when I was an officer. And those two guys combined were like my whole career. They taught me my philosophy, my mindset, pretty much how I did things. So I walked over there and there they were sitting side by side like bookends. It was a really weird moment. So those are the two guys in the SEAL teams. One was all about combat and how to lead and plan and in combat. That was the first guy. The second guy was all about how to plan complex missions, hostage rescue missions, use air assets, a lot of complex stuff. And he was a very calm guy. And when things were crazy, and I watched him and I emulated him. So that was great. When I went into UBS, I wasn't a sales guy. So I saw a couple of pretty good salesmen that had nothing to do with money. And they kind of explained the sales game, how tough it was. Find your sweet spot. For me, it was doing seminars to grow your business. And that helped there. And then there's one board member I have right now that's been a mentor for me on mergers and acquisitions and a lot of the financial mechanics associated with private equity. And so there's always been somebody there. And of course I end up being a mentor to a lot of people one way or the other over time.
Yeah. It's important, right? I mean, for those people listening, I think it's amazing to me, the people that will just give you time if you just ask for it. And I think that's the key. Your wife was kind of almost in a sense calling you out on that one, right? Like if you just go and ask that person for help, people like Marty Strong will be there to offer help for no money.
I agree. When I first started in financial services, I picked up the Success magazine that the company had, where they kind of had showcasing, financial advisors that were doing well in different categories. And so I called him up. I kind of did like a Napoleon Hill, thing. Said, do you mind? And every single one of them. And some of these guys were millionaires based on sales, Every single one of them didn't just give me the time of day. Some of them said, let me set up another call so I can give you the time you deserve. And I eventually kind of ended up with maybe one or two that aligned with what I wanted to do. And they would check in on me. They'd say, how are things going? I didn't want to bug them. And I don't think I've had nobody ever say no.
Nope. Absolutely amazing. I love it. So talk to us about these two books, one coming out this year, Be Nimble. The next one coming out next year, Be Visionary. Tell us about those, what inspired you, and what should we look for in those books?
Okay. So Be Visionary is about strategy development. That's the one that's coming out at the end of 22. Be Nimble is available right now for pre-sale on Amazon. And you can go to Amazon under Marty Strong, or you can go to my website at martystrongbenimble.com, and there's a link there. The underlying premise of Be Nimble, which I almost named to Be Humble, and we've kind of touched on a lot of that already. If you can ascend to a point of intellectual humility as a leader or as a person, it allows you to open your mind and start accepting information and also seeking information from different sources. And I found that the next step after you've done that, after you start to see the world the way it really is, not the way it was taught to you in business school, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it sets you up to be nimble, to be agile. If you think the definition of being rigid is kind of doing the same thing over and over again. And in the book, I use lots of different examples. I mean, one I talk about is if somebody asked you a question about the capital of a country, whatever, would you go and look up, the answer in an Encyclopedia Britannica from 1974?
No.
But it would have been accurate, right? It would have been
Very
correct
accurate.
In 1974, which means your high school education, your college education, your graduate education, pretty much first off, you're being taught history. So you're already behind the learning curve. You're not being taught what's happening tomorrow. You're being taught history. So there are a lot of people that get stuck in their ways and have a hard time being agile and nimble and structuring, clever and creative solutions, either operationally or strategically, because they can't let it go. And I'm talking about the good and the bad. So if you let go of the baggage, you got to let go of the fact that you had a great sales year, or you got a bonus, or you got promoted, because that's holding you back too. That's reinforcing all of your biases from yesterday back. And if you had a really bad day, or you got fired from your last job and you're at a new job and you're in the first couple of weeks, you can't carry that around, like a ball and chain either, because it doesn't help. It doesn't help with what's happening today and going forward. So being nimble is all those things. It's a lot of all the things we've already talked about today. And I was inspired to write that particular book because I was doing a lot of mentoring, internal to my organization, but also externally. And I thought, well, I keep kind of coming back to these same themes. I think I'll just write them down. Maybe I'll write an article. And then the whole Tim Ferriss thing kind of kicked in. I said, well, I was going to write a business book. So I took the outline for an article and kind of blew it out. And eventually that became a book proposal. And then I submitted it to a bunch of publishers and I got picked up and I was off to the races. And I wrote most of it during the first 8 or 9 months of COVID. So I had
a little time on our hands, didn't we?
Yeah. And, so that's the one that's coming out soon. And Be Visionary kind of takes up where that left off, more on the value of having a vision and using vision and strategy in place of optimization and a focus on short-term metrics and short-term gratification, because that's also besides choking off, looking at the horizon and looking around the corner and seeing if there's somebody there with a baseball bat getting ready to waylay you. You also don't see the opportunities. You don't realize that, you could have gone a little bit to the left and you might have been able to, grab a hold of something or see something down the road, and you don't invest. If you don't believe in the future, you don't think of the future, why am I going to spend money on training, or why am I going to invest in, moving into another state or whatever, if all I care about is my KPIs of, today,
right,
and my financial metrics for today.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what sucked me into the second book.
Love it. So check it out at Marty Strong, Be Nimble, right? .com. That's where you can find that, pre-order on Amazon. And then kind of the last couple of questions here. I think fear, in my opinion, is one of the biggest things that holds people back from taking that next step, to taking action, having clarity on their goals, what's important to them. How many of the fears, Marty, that you put in your mind actually came true to the magnitude you put them in your mind to be?
Not one.
Yeah. I love the long pause. It's almost like I set this up for every guest. I mean, it's literally the longest pause of any question I ask.
Yeah.
And I ask it every time because I love the question is we all as human beings let things in our mind, this space between these two ears is so dangerous, isn't it? It's so dangerous.
It is. I've got five kids and 5 grandkids. And I have a couple of my kids that, you know, when they were younger, especially that, yeah, they lived 1,000 deaths. You know, they anticipated the worst case, and you know, all people are human. I'm human. If something happens, like when I heard about that speech that was going to change our world for the next couple of months, I sat there and I thought, holy man, what the hell? And then I started thinking, okay, what's the worst that can happen? And then, all right, you know, do we have the ability to handle the worst that can happen? Yeah. All right. And that whole process for me was probably about 5 minutes. So I'd still go through the process. I still have the fear. I still have that, you know, emotional kind of gut punch kind of thing. But my time in that mode, that mind state's much shorter because I can compare it to things. I'm not getting shot at. You know, I've
been there, done that.
Beat cancer twice. You know, okay, this isn't as bad as it could be, right?
Right.
And I use perspective.
And I love that, everything you just said there. And I call it the bounce back theory. The most successful people I've seen in anything, sports, business, military, they bounce back quicker from bad news than those that want to go home and have the pity party that goes on for weeks and months. And I mean, to your point, this is massive news for your business.
Right.
5 minutes. 5 minutes is what you spend on it.
And my team, it's a learning opportunity. If they've never been shot at, they've never had any crisis that ever rose to a really high level. Let's learn from this one.
Yeah.
You're going to be stronger and better when you're running companies down the road. If you take this in the right kind of, you know, framework and see it as a positive rather than a negative.
Yeah. I love that, man. That's great feedback, great wisdom. So the final question for you is, if you had to go back and tell Marty Strong 10, 15 years ago, give that guy some advice, what's the advice you'd give that guy?
I think it goes back to survival equals
just
winning.
Survive, man.
Survival equals winning, and winning equals success. Whatever game you pick, stay in it, learn everything you can. Don't let any short-term negative setbacks, whatever, you know, knock you off your course. And it'll all work out as long as you keep doing that. You know,
show up. Strategy,
create a plan, build it, execute it, optimize it, create a new strategy, build a plan, repeat.
I like it. And to your point on that too, is the plan isn't it may be the perfect plan today, but that doesn't mean it's the perfect plan a day, a week, a month, a quarter from now.
Yeah.
And be okay with that.
Yeah. It stinks to have to completely unravel a plan that's brand new, you know, like fresh paint smell. It happens. You have to do it. And in the SEAL teams, it's every mission plan is briefed to an incredible degree. And I've led missions where we anticipated, you know, for months and briefed all kinds of senior leaders and generals and 4-stars. And then we got there and everything was different. And I got everybody in a little huddle. This is true.
Okay.
Grabbed some sticks and rocks and stuff. And it was like a pickup basketball game. You 3 guys go right. You 3 guys go left. And at this time, we're going to come in the middle. You guys cover this side. If anything, real simple. The whole plan, months of planning and rehearsing, right out the window.
It's amazing.
That's where that contingent thinking has got to be a part of training for leaders too.
So we know Marty Strong, BeNimble.com. Where else can our listeners find more of you?
I'm on LinkedIn under Marty Strong, and I've got an Instagram that's at Martin L. Strong. And in any of those places you can go. Instagram's pretty informative.
We will put that in the show notes. So check down below if you're listening to this on a podcast station. Check it out. But Marty, man, it's been awesome having you. Love the wisdom. Got a couple pages of notes here, which is always good. But really appreciate you being on the Circuit of Success.
Thanks, Brett. It's been a lot of fun.
Tune in next week for another episode of The Circuit of Success with Brett Gilliland on the lineupmedia.fm podcast network. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and through our website, circuitofsuccess.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and email any questions to info@circuitofsuccess.com.
This podcast was a presentation of lineupmedia.fm.